they all respond. Crucially, the challenge is that when juntas, when military leaders have launched coups in this region and then been isolated by the West, Russia has been there waiting in the wings to exploit this, and we've seen that in countries like Mali.
Yeah, I mean, this region has really been impacted by instability, and we've seen Wagner mercenaries there become more active. So what does this all do to that?
Yeah, the potential destabilization could be really severe. It's key to keep in mind that Niger is this large landlocked country in a fragile region. Most of the people there live in poverty, and like the neighbors, Mali, Burkina Faso, it's been overwhelmed by multiple Islamist insurgencies for years now, and it's one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. And the situation in all of these countries is getting worse.
NPR's Emmanuel Akinwotu, thank you very much.
Thank you.
New York City has received over 90,000 migrants and asylum seekers in the last year.
That is a lot to absorb, according to the leader of the nation's most populous city. Mayor Eric Adams has been saying the city can't handle so many, and recently announced several changes which amount to an historic shift in how New York City treats immigration.
NPR's Jasmine Gartz has been covering this story. Tell us about New York's response to tens of thousands of immigrants that have landed in the city.
Sure. Well, two big things. Mayor Eric Adams has said the city will be handing out flyers at the U.S.-Mexico border, dissuading people from coming to New York. And also the city has announced that single migrants can only stay in New York shelters for 60 days. I spoke to Professor Alora Mukherjee. She teaches immigration law at Columbia University, and she says this is a big departure from New York's historic stance as a beacon for immigrants.
For at least 40 years, New York City has provided a right to shelter to all people, regardless of their immigration status, who need a place to stay for the night. And the recent changes announced by the mayor are devastating.
Devastating, all right, so tell us what it looks like there.
Sure, the city has been scrambling. It just announced a center for migrants in Queens in the parking lot of a psychiatric hospital. I spent the last few weeks at another one of these new sites for migrants. This one is for migrant men. It's located in Brooklyn, and it can serve around 1,400 people. I spoke to dozens of people there who told me conditions are dire. 2 bathrooms per 80 or 90 people, meals that are sometimes in such bad condition folks get sick. I did reach out to the city with these allegations, and they did not respond. I met a young Colombian man named Davey. He asked that his last name be withheld because he was worried about retaliation, and here's what he had to say.
Pues uno más o menos entiende el inglés, obviamente pues uno entiende las groserías en inglés,
And what he's saying is, I understand enough English to know the security guards are insulting us. They treat us like animals. And this is something I heard widespread complaints about. People saying they've been physically harassed and insulted by security guards. So as a result of all this, there's a number of migrants and asylum seekers who are now just sleeping on nearby streets.
The Mayor Eric Adams has over and over again asked the federal government for help. What kind of help is he asking for?
Well, first, financial assistance. The mayor has said New York cannot pay for all this alone, but also he and New York Governor Kathy Hochul have urged the federal government to expedite giving these folks legal work permits. And every single migrant I spoke to told me, I just want to work. I want to move on with my life. I don't want to live in a shelter. But the thing is, the soonest an asylum seeker can get a work permit is 6 months after they apply for asylum, and applying for asylum can take years. So this is pushing a lot of people into an underground economy. For example, an overwhelming number of folks I met out there, they work in food delivery, and several have gotten injured or had their bikes stolen or a chunk of their wages taken. And they're not in a situation where they feel they can ask for help, so this lends itself to a lot of exploitation.
NPR's Jasmine Gartz, thanks for bringing this to story.
Thank you.
And that's Up First for Thursday, July 27th. I'm Martinez.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Up First is produced by Nina Kravitsky and Anna Perez. Our editors are Rena Anvani and Amra Pasic. Our technical director is Zach Coleman, who has engineering support from Stacey Evan. Our executive producer is Erica Negala.
And don't forget to start your day here with us tomorrow. If you want more news right now, find the show that we host, NPR's Morning Edition, on your NPR station at stations.npr.org.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Wise, the account that lets you manage your money internationally. With Wise, you can send, spend, and receive in over 40 different currencies. You always get the mid-market exchange rate with no markups or hidden fees. Simple. Download the Wise app today.
Hi, I'm Cardiff Garcia, and I'm returning for a second season as the host of The Next Chapter by American Express Business Class. In this podcast, I sit down with best-selling authors to discuss how the world has changed since their books were published. We'll cover topics ranging from why generalists often outperform specialists, and how to assess risk like a poker-playing psychologist. We'll hear from best-selling authors like James Clear, Susan Cain, and more. So listen to The Next Chapter by American Express Business Class anywhere you get your podcasts.
From New York Times, I'm Michael Barr. This is a daily. Today, a major new study has revealed in staggering ways just how much elite college admissions in the U.S. systematically favor the rich and the super rich. My colleague, David Leonhardt, walks us through the data and explains why the study is fueling calls to abandon long-standing practices like legacy admissions. It's Thursday, July 27th. David, welcome back to the Daily.
Thank you, Michael.
David, after the Supreme Court struck down race-based affirmative action in college admissions a few weeks ago, said it was unconstitutional, a lot of people's attention quickly turned to other features of the college admissions process that feel, in a way, like alternative forms of affirmative action and preference, giving people a clear set of advantages in the process. And a lot of those people started asking, why aren't we talking about all the ways that college admissions favor the privileged?
Yes, and I think that makes sense because college admissions are about to change more than they have in a long time. And so it makes sense for colleges and for society as a whole to ask, well, what features of the current system should remain and what features should change, not just affirmative action, but really the whole process.
Right, and in the midst of that debate comes a study, and we get a lot of studies in the world of journalism, but this study stood out, and it's what we want to talk with you about because it seems to offer a really authoritative, perhaps even the most authoritative ever look at how systems of advantage for those with a lot of advantages already play out in the college admissions process. So David, tell us about this study.
I do think it's the clearest look we've gotten behind the scenes at college admissions of these institutions. And the reason is that it combined admissions records, internal admissions records that several of these colleges gave the researchers access to with tax returns, which gives us hard data on who it is that is applying to these schools. And that allows us, in a way that we really haven't before, to get a very clear sense of who's applying, who's getting in, and who's going. And I've gotten to know this study really well because I've been reporting on these same issues for 20 years and talking to these researchers who are at Harvard and Brown who did it. And I'm actually an informal, unpaid advisor to them. I get their thoughts about what are the questions that those of us who aren't economists want answered by data like this. And I really do think, after years of writing about this, that this has given me and all of us a better sense of what actually happens inside admissions offices than we've had before.
And so with all this information, what did the researchers who did this study find? What's the headline result?
I think the headline result is that we live in an extremely unequal society, and college admissions in some ways makes it more unequal. So affluent kids are on average much more qualified than less affluent kids. They have better academic qualifications by any measure, grades, SAT scores, essays. And so, of course, because colleges need to think about which students are prepared to do the work, colleges are going to end up admitting more affluent students for those reasons. And yet, even on top of that, colleges give large advantages in admissions to privileged kids over similarly qualified middle and low income kids. And it's that last thing, it's that idea that when you're looking at two kids who have similar grades, similar test scores, similar academic qualifications, that the affluent kid, and particularly the very affluent kid, is nonetheless more likely to get in. It's that idea that has caused this study to get so much attention.
And David, can you quantify the advantage that this study found? Walk us through some of the numbers that this study produced.
So the way that I find most helpful is when they look at a typical class at an Ivy Plus college, so those are the 8 actual Ivy League schools, plus Duke, the University of Chicago, Stanford, and MIT. When you look at the typical class at one of these colleges, about 9% of the students come from the top 1% of the income distribution, meaning they come from families earning more than $600,000 a year, and didn't get in because of their academic qualifications.
Didn't get in because of their academic qualifications.
Or didn't get in solely because of their academic qualifications. These are still kids who do extremely well in school, but when you compare them to kids with less money who didn't get in, they don't do that. And in many ways, that is the core finding of the paper.
So David, let me make sure I understand this. This study finds that 9% of the college students enrolled in these highly selective elite colleges, in a sense, they don't deserve to have ever been admitted and enrolled based on their qualifications versus any other kid who applied. It's just that they were very, very rich.
I think the colleges would push back on that characterization. Colleges would say, no, these students are still extremely qualified. But I also understand why people would look at the study and make that statement. Because if decisions were made based solely on academic qualifications, then 9% of the students at these schools wouldn't be there, and they would be replaced by kids with similar academic qualifications who come from less affluent backgrounds.
Right. And there would therefore be greater economic diversity in these colleges.
Precisely. And it gets even starker when you look at the richest of the rich. So let's imagine 2 different applicants with the same academic qualifications, one of whom comes from a family with average income, one of whom comes from a family with income in the top 0.1%. So imagine a family making about $3 million or more a year. That applicant from the top 0.1% is more than twice as likely to be admitted than a child with the same test scores who comes from a family with an average income.
Wow.
And I think it's that difference, this idea that even after a kid from a middle class or poor background has managed to do as well on the SAT, on these other academic measures, they are still less likely to get in than a kid from a more affluent background. It's that has people looking at this data and saying, how is that fair?
Right, because what this data establishes is that when it comes to college admissions, there really is a form of affirmative action for the nation's wealthiest kids. Perhaps people suspected that was the case and even acted as if it were the case, but here it is formally and pretty authoritatively documented and established.
Yes, that's right.
But David, as you've been talking, something's been bothering me, which is that a lot of these elite, highly selective colleges that we've been talking about, that this data is drawn from, they say, and they say it very proudly, that they are need blind when it comes to admissions, which means that, technically speaking, they are not making admissions decisions based on income at all. In fact, they're supposed to be, as that phrase suggests, blind to it. So how does the study explain this level of advantage for those who are rich when the process is supposed to be blind to their financial background? What does it cite as the causes of it?
That's right. It's not wealth directly. It's three other factors that correlate very much with wealth and end up giving wealthy kids an advantage. And the first of those three will be familiar to many people. It's called legacy admissions. It's the idea that if one of the applicant's parents went to the same school, that applicant gets a leg up in the admissions process.
Right. It's a formal process. It's not secret, and it's been around for a long time.
That's right. It's the official policy of most of these schools.
And of course, legacy students, almost by definition, are likely to be coming from well-off families. Not all of them, but many of them. So this policy kind of guarantees a preference for a fair number of rich applicants.
That's right. The legacy population skews more affluent than the population as a whole. And this study tells us that legacy applicants get a leg up. Now, it's
so glad it rained. It was pretty hot. Now it's like 75 degrees outside. Mediterranean food. Here at Bridgewater Falls. Perfect. All right.
With Grace Sharkey.
Just a quick heads up, this part of the show is going to feature some talk about sex trafficking.
Today Explained is back. Sound of Freedom is the surprise hit of the summer. Part of that has to do with faith groups buying out theaters and paying tickets forward to people who might not usually go to the movies. But undoubtedly, a big part of that success has to do with people wanting to see a movie that's got a message. And the message here is that child sex trafficking is heinous and needs to be stopped.
no arguments. But not everyone is jazzed to see Sound of Freedom as a vessel for that message because of the real-life man and organization this movie's about. The man is Tim Ballard. The organization is Operation Underground Railroad, OUR. Writer Meg Conley knows them both.
So, unfortunately, I have some personal experience with the organization behind the movie Operation Underground Railroad. In 2014, I went on what they called a jump, which was basically a human trafficking raid that was supposed to be one step in saving the world from what they call the enslavement of children, like through human trafficking. So I get a call one afternoon from this man named Tim Ballard, who had founded Operation Underground Railroad. I'd never spoken to him before, but he did attend church with my parents, which is, I think, how he knew about me. At the time I was writing, I guess what they were calling like a mommy blog, and Operation Underground Railroad was a relatively new organization, and I think he wanted some publicity for it. And so when he called me, he asked if I was interested on going on a human trafficking raid with the organization in the Dominican Republic, because he said he really liked my work and he thought that I articulated things with insight, that I was a good observer, and he wanted me to document the work that they were doing to save children. Ballard's whole pitch at the time, which I was too naive to question, was that he was the ultimate authority on this. He talked a lot about how he had worked for Homeland Security and that he had been trying to get rid of human trafficking this way through like official government channels, but they weren't willing to do the work like he was. So I believed him, and who doesn't want to save the children? It felt scary to go with him, but I said yes because I felt like it would be selfish to say no. When we get to the Dominican Republic, there's like a long ride to the house where the raid is going to take place. And when I get to the house, there's like a camera crew there, which surprised me. And I'm told that they film all their jumps because they want to make a TV series about all of their anti-trafficking work to raise awareness and get more people involved, both within their organization and outside their organization, with anti-trafficking efforts. So the next day, the traffickers pull up. So they've rented a bus. The OUR has rented a bus and picked up the traffickers. And it's several people trafficking these kids with kind of one lead guy. And there are 26 kids who end up being brought to the bus. We get word that they're pulling up, and so I am sent outside to the pool where there's like a stack of soda cans, and kids start filing out to the pool area. They're mostly middle school to high school age. Some kids jump into the pool. I hand other kids soda, and I feel I'm nauseated because I don't understand. Now that I'm confronted with these children, I realize I don't understand what led them to that bus. It's kind of the first time where I'm like, oh, I don't know enough to be here. Ballard is inside with the traffickers, and he's supposed to be like negotiating the price of like each, there's no good word here, service, I guess, that will be like quote unquote like provided by each child, but really he's negotiating the price of like each violation of each child, right? Like that would be the correct terminology, like each victimization of each child. And I think that is going to wrap up. And I won't see any of it, but then one of the OUR members opens the back door and calls out to me and says, Meg, Tim wants you inside. I don't want to go inside, but I also don't know how to say no. So I say yes, and I walk inside. Now I'm kind of standing towards the back of the room, and I'm like, okay, he just wants me in here to observe, and so if I can just get like far enough away from everything that's happening, like this is still okay. But the raid starts, and it's terrifying. There's a lot of shouting and a lot of screaming, and like Tim's yelling like who sold me out, or like who ratted, like a movie. And I moved quickly to get to the back door because I want to be out by the pool. That's where I was supposed to be. I don't want to be here. And when I open the back door, there's a law enforcement person standing there with a very, very, very large gun. And he yells at me to like get back inside and get down. And so like I'm forced onto the ground, like onto those beige tiles, and like face down, and like I'm handcuffed. And the whole time, at this point, like once the raid has started, they're not just relying on like the hidden cameras anymore. The camera crew has come out, and they're moving around the room filming the whole thing, and I'm face down on the ground in this room I was never supposed to be in, and there's like, I can out of the corner of my eye like see a camera like sweeping over me.
And that footage is on YouTube. I watched it yesterday. I saw your face.
Yeah, it's insane.
Tell me what you learned about this style of sort of vigilante sex trafficking policing. I mean, how many of those girls that were at that house that day in 2014 had a history of being involved in this kind of work?
Yeah, so after this thing I asked, like, where are the 26, so there were 26 kids, and at the time they're telling me it's 26 kids. It ends up being, not every person there was underage. And I'm told that, at the time that they've all been, you know, trafficked over and over again. I find out later that that's not true. I mean, these kinds of anti-trafficking raids, they create demand where there isn't always demand. At least 2 of the kids on that raid had never been trafficked before. That was the first time, which means that like we created trauma for them they may never have experienced. And then after the raid, I think it was in 2015, Foreign Policy comes out with a story about OUR, and it includes reporting on this raid. And I find out that after this operation, a local organization called the National Council for Children and Adolescents, like they're supposed to do the aftercare, and they realize like, you brought us 20-ish kids. We do not have the capacity to provide like services for this many people. We cannot provide basically like safety. And so the kids were released like within a week or two and lost. Like nobody knows what happened to many of them, which means that like they got a soda and like a swim from us.
That was nearly 10 years ago, right? To your knowledge, you know, how has this organization, Operation Underground Railroad, OUR, evolved since then?
I think they've gotten better at appearances, slightly. So Tim Ballard, he, as I watched over the years, I was able to understand, you know, by 2016, 2017, after a lot of research and a lot of therapy, like everything that was wrong with that raid, but also with the model as a whole. It doesn't work. We know that like anti-trafficking raids don't work. We know that the people, like the traffickers who are arrested a lot of the time, they're usually small fish. And another small fish comes in and like takes their place. This doesn't like address like some of the like actual like the people in charge of like some of the cartels that are actually like really running like human trafficking rings. Like that is real, but like this does not do anything to stop that. It just means like someone else is going to traffic kids next time. But it also doesn't prevent human trafficking. Like we know what prevents human trafficking. Social safety nets prevent human trafficking. What Tim Ballard does not prevent human trafficking. What it does do is create a cult of personality, and it turns the world into Star Wars. They're a myth-making engine. Like, they exist to generate a world in which bad things only happen in quote-unquote like the special world, which happens to be, according to OUR, not America. America is like the ordinary world where everything is okay. But the special world, the place where you experience like trials, but also your transformation, that is anywhere where